On a freezing winter night, a stray dog limped into the hospital, carrying a lifeless child in its jaws. Exhausted Nurse Clara could hardly believe her eyes. But when she knelt to pick up the boy, the dog looked up at her with a look of desperation and impossible loyalty. As she followed this mysterious animal, Clara would unravel a hidden story of sacrifice, betrayal, and a love that transcended even death. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming an emotion that you won't want to miss. It was one of those bitterly cold winter nights where even the strongest winter coat offered little relief. The sky was a vast, dark expanse, stars twinkling faintly through wisps of cloud, and the air felt thick, almost frozen. Clara, an exhausted nurse on her third consecutive night shift, shuffled through the quiet halls of the hospital. The fluorescent lights cast a cold, unwavering glow that didn't reach into the shadows, adding a sense of isolation to the already somber atmosphere. Clara could barely feel her fingers from the cold outside as she settled in, bracing herself for what would likely be a night like any other. As the minutes ticked by, she fell into the familiar rhythm of her routine. This place was more than her workplace, it had become her refuge, a space where she could drown out her own thoughts and focus entirely on caring for others. Despite the feeling of purpose, each shift took its toll on her, grinding her spirit and body down slowly but steadily. She had once been driven by a deep passion for nursing, but over time, that fire had waned. Now, the hospital felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison, where each patient was another reminder of the emotional numbness she couldn't quite shake. The steady, rhythmic beeps of heart monitors and distant hum of machinery seemed to amplify the silence rather than fill it. The sounds were so consistent they became a part of her world's white noise, soothing in an odd way but also alienating. There was an emptiness in the halls, an eerie stillness that amplified Clara's sense of isolation, reminding her just how alone she often felt, even while surrounded by other nurses, doctors, and the occasional patient. The night shift, while lonely, offered her a rare chance to escape her own mind. As she walked the halls, memories surfaced unexpectedly. She remembered her first day at the hospital, years ago when her heart had been full of hope and compassion, ready to make a difference. But time had worn her down. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of the purpose that had brought her here. The monotony, the losses, and the endless loop of human suffering had slowly dulled her spirit. Tonight was supposed to be no different, another long, uneventful night to endure until dawn. Yet something felt different this time, an unexplainable feeling stirring at the edges of her mind, pulling her from her usual routine. It was almost as if the hospital itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Clara shrugged off the sensation, brushing it off as fatigue or the strange tricks the mind played in such quiet solitude. Her rounds took her through the different wards, all eerily empty, the patients asleep or sedated, the lights low, casting strange, stretched shadows on the walls. She made her way toward the main entrance, a space she rarely lingered in during the night shift. As she approached, she was struck by how silent everything was, the air heavy, as though some presence had entered the space, unseen but palpable. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, a strange sound in an otherwise dead-still room. The automatic doors slid open suddenly, a draft of icy wind curling into the hospital, making her shiver. She hugged herself instinctively, wondering who might be entering the hospital at this hour. And then, through the icy mist outside, she saw it, a figure moving in the shadows. Clara squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure seemed to move cautiously, with a strange gait that didn't quite resemble a person's. She felt her heart begin to race, her body waking up with a jolt of adrenaline. Her hands tensed, ready to call security, yet something about the figure made her hesitate, an inexplicable pull to keep watching, to see what was approaching. As the shape grew clearer, her eyes widened. A scruffy, trembling dog emerged from the shadows, its fur matted and tangled, its body shivering visibly from the cold. The sight itself was odd enough, but what froze Clara in her tracks was what the dog was carrying, a small, unmoving child cradled delicately in its jaws. The boy appeared to be unconscious, his small face pale and lips tinged a worrying shade of blue. Clara blinked, wondering if she was truly seeing this or if it was some sort of hallucination from her exhaustion. But it was real. Her heart thundered in her chest as she rushed forward, adrenaline pumping through her veins. She called out softly, unsure if the dog would run or react aggressively. But the dog merely looked at her, its eyes dark and imploring, as if it understood the urgency of the situation. Clara's hands trembled as she knelt before them, overcome with an instinctual urgency that this was no ordinary encounter. Whatever had brought them here, she knew at that moment that this night would be unlike any other. Clara's hands trembled as she knelt on the cold hospital floor, her eyes darting between the child's pale face and the trembling dog that stood protectively beside him. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. It was an unusual, almost surreal scene. A stray dog walking into the hospital on its own was strange enough, but one carrying a child was beyond anything she could have imagined. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of something inexplicable, something she knew she couldn't ignore. For a moment, Clara didn't know what to do. Her instincts told her to reach for the boy, to feel for a pulse, to make sure he was breathing. Yet, the dog's intense, almost human gaze held her back. The dog's eyes were a deep, sorrowful brown, a look that held both fear and urgency. It didn't flinch, didn't bark, and didn't move a muscle. It simply stood there, waiting, as if it knew that Clara was the only one who could help. It was as if, somehow, the dog understood the importance of bringing the child here. Slowly, Clara extended her hand, speaking in a soft, soothing tone to calm both herself and the animal. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm here to help." The dog didn't move away. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, its eyes never leaving hers, as if silently urging her to take action. Clara took a deep breath and gently placed her fingers on the boy's wrist, feeling for a pulse. Relief washed over her as she found it, weak, but steady. The boy was alive, though clearly in desperate need of warmth and medical care. The few people scattered around the waiting area had stopped in their tracks, watching the scene with wide eyes and hushed whispers. Clara barely noticed them, her focus entirely on the child and the dog. She felt the weight of every second ticking by, aware that any delay could cost the boy his life. With swift, practiced movements, she slipped her arms around the child, cradling his cold, fragile body. The dog's watchful gaze followed her every movement, and she could feel its presence as a constant, silent guard. As she lifted the boy into her arms, the dog let out a low whimper, a sound so soft yet filled with a strange, poignant sorrow. Clara looked down, meeting its gaze again. She couldn't shake the feeling that this dog wasn't just here by coincidence. There was an unmistakable purpose behind its actions, an urgency in its eyes that spoke louder than words. She gave the dog a reassuring nod, silently promising to take care of the boy, and headed down the hall to the emergency ward. The nurses and doctors who saw Clara carrying the child quickly jumped into action, snapping out of their astonished daze. Questions flew from all directions. Where had the child come from? Was he alone? Clara could only shake her head, unable to explain. She simply said, "We need to get him warmed up and checked right away." The team moved efficiently, setting the child on a bed and gathering equipment. Clara hovered close, unable to pull herself away, as if drawn by an invisible tether to the mysterious arrival of this small, fragile life. Once the boy was stable and surrounded by medical attention, Clara finally took a step back. Her body was buzzing with a mix of relief and confusion, her mind racing with questions she couldn't begin to answer. She looked toward the entrance, wondering if the dog was still there, waiting. She hurried back, her pulse quickening, and found the animal sitting patiently by the door, its eyes still fixed on the hallway where the child had been taken. The dog's calmness in the face of so much chaos struck her deeply. She knelt down by the dog, her mind reeling. "Who are you?" she whispered, half to herself, half to the dog. She reached out and gently touched its head, feeling the cold, rough fur beneath her fingertips. The dog didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into her touch, as if understanding her bewilderment, as if it, too, had been carrying a heavy burden. In that quiet moment, Clara felt an odd connection, an unspoken bond that went beyond anything logical. The dog's eyes, full of an intelligence that defied explanation, met hers, and Clara felt her heart ache with a strange mixture of sorrow and awe. She couldn't shake the feeling that this animal had a story of survival, of loss, and of loyalty so deep it had brought it all the way here. She stood up slowly, her gaze lingering on the dog for one last moment before turning to rejoin her colleagues. This was only the beginning, she knew, of something much larger than herself or this one night at the hospital. As Clara left the emergency room, she couldn't resist glancing back at the doors where the child was being attended to. The image of the dog carrying the boy still played vividly in her mind. She hadn't even had a chance to check if anyone had brought the dog in with them, or if it had simply wandered in by itself. As she made her way back to the entrance, she saw the dog still sitting by the door, waiting patiently. It was as though the animal had a silent understanding that his mission was not yet complete. The dog's posture remained stoic, almost noble, as it gazed down the hallway toward the emergency room. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Leo, as she had decided to call him, was more than just a stray. His loyalty to the child, his calm in the face of chaos, everything about this dog felt purposeful. She slowly approached him again, her hand extending cautiously. She reached to gently pat his head, and Leo, as if understanding her intention, looked up at her with those soulful, weary eyes. Clara knelt beside Leo, her thoughts racing as she tried to piece together the mystery of how he had come to find the child. Every instinct told her that Leo was no ordinary dog, he was here for a reason Clara felt deeply compelled to uncover. There was an intelligence in his eyes that seemed almost human, a glint of determination that matched her own. For a few silent moments, they simply looked at each other, a quiet connection growing between them, one that needed no words. Suddenly, the head doctor from the emergency room approached, his expression a mix of curiosity and mild disbelief. "Clara," he called softly, gesturing her to come closer, "we've managed to stabilize the boy, but we have no idea who he is or where he came from. The child didn't have any ID, and there's no one here to claim him." Clara looked back at Leo, then at her colleague, her mind working quickly. She hesitated, then said, "The dog brought him here. I don't know how or why, but he came into the hospital carrying the child." The doctor blinked, momentarily taken aback by her words. But after a pause, he nodded, glancing at Leo with newfound respect. "We'll need to alert the authorities, of course," he said, "but this dog might be our only link to understanding where the boy came from." Clara could only agree, the realization settling over her like a revelation. Leo wasn't merely a stray animal, he was a key to unraveling the mystery surrounding the child's arrival. Her heart pounded with a strange excitement mixed with fear. Over the next few hours, Clara stayed close to both the boy and Leo. The police arrived, taking statements and documenting the strange circumstances. Leo remained calm, his gaze steady on the emergency room as if keeping silent vigil over the child's safety. Clara could feel the intensity of his loyalty and protectiveness. She had never encountered an animal with such a profound sense of purpose, and it moved her deeply. At one point, an officer approached Clara, his brow furrowed in curiosity. "So, this dog, he just walked in with the boy?" Clara nodded, explaining as best as she could the surreal events that had unfolded. The officer shook his head, glancing down at Leo in awe. "We'll need to investigate further, but from the looks of it, this dog may have saved the boy's life." Leo glanced up at the officer momentarily before returning his gaze to the hallway, completely undistracted by the people around him. As the night deepened, Clara found herself drawn back to Leo's side, sitting quietly next to him outside the emergency room. She felt an overwhelming gratitude for him, even though she barely understood the extent of his role in all this. Leo rested his head on his paws, a gesture of quiet patience. Clara gently placed her hand on his back, her fingers running through his coarse fur. She wondered where he had come from, how he had found the boy, and what it was that had driven him to bring the child here. By the time the sun's first light crept through the hospital windows, Clara had made a decision. She wasn't going to simply walk away from this strange event, she was determined to learn more about Leo, the boy, and whatever chain of events had brought them here. Her shift was ending, and she was exhausted, but she couldn't bear to leave the mystery unresolved. As she looked down at Leo, she felt certain that the dog held answers she needed to find, answers that would lead them all somewhere they could never have anticipated. After ending her shift, Clara couldn't bring herself to leave the hospital. She lingered near Leo, feeling the pull of the mystery surrounding the boy, and a strange sense of duty. Her exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but she knew she wouldn't find rest unless she uncovered more about this child and his loyal canine companion. She quietly resolved to investigate further, starting with anything the police might have uncovered. With Leo by her side, she felt a glimmer of purpose that had long since faded from her daily life. The boy was still unconscious, but stable, his small body wrapped in blankets, slowly gaining warmth. Nurses and doctors checked in on him regularly, though no one could explain how he had ended up in such a critical condition. Clara stayed close, slipping into the room between rounds, watching his breathing, noting every faint sign of recovery. Each time she entered, she felt the silent presence of Leo waiting just outside, as if he, too, was unwilling to leave the child alone. By mid-morning, police officers returned to the hospital to speak with Clara and the staff. They questioned everyone about the strange events of the previous night, carefully noting details about Leo's arrival and the boy's condition. Clara tried to explain Leo's calm and intentional manner, his apparent decision to bring the boy to safety, but her words seemed insufficient to capture what she had seen in the dog's eyes. She struggled to articulate the animal's awareness, the almost human determination she sensed in his gaze. One of the officers listened thoughtfully, studying Leo with a growing respect. "If he brought the boy here," the officer said quietly to Clara, "then maybe he knows more than we do." His words hung in the air, both unsettling and profound. Clara nodded, a rush of conviction flowing through her. She felt certain that Leo held answers that no one could ignore. The officer continued, explaining that he would help check nearby areas and shelters, hoping to find any clue about where the child might have come from. With Leo as her silent companion, Clara began a search of her own, deciding to walk the surrounding streets in hopes of retracing Leo's steps. She brought a leash and some treats, but she needn't have worried, Leo followed her willingly, moving with a steady, purposeful stride. Together, they walked the streets around the hospital, exploring alleyways and side streets, hoping that Leo might lead her somewhere that could shed light on the child's identity. As they walked, Clara watched Leo intently, marveling at his focus and unerring sense of direction. At times, he would pause, his nose raised to the air, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if searching for something familiar. Each time they passed a shadowed corner or abandoned building, Clara felt a shiver of anticipation, wondering if they were about to uncover a hidden clue. But hour after hour, they found nothing, only empty streets and the lingering traces of a cold winter's night. Just as Clara was beginning to lose hope, Leo suddenly perked up, his ears swiveling forward as he caught an unfamiliar scent. He led her down a narrow, forgotten alley lined with rusted metal bins and the faint smell of damp concrete. Clara's heart pounded as she followed, trying to keep up with Leo's quickened pace. They turned a corner, and there, tucked behind a row of empty crates, Clara spotted a small makeshift shelter, pieced together with bits of cardboard and worn fabric. Crouching low, Clara peered inside and felt a pang of sorrow as she took in the sight. It was clear someone had been living here. Tattered blankets, a small stash of empty cans, and a few toys lay scattered inside. Leo sniffed the ground around the shelter, his nose lingering near the blankets. Clara's chest tightened as the realization set in. This could be where the boy had been staying, perhaps with someone who cared for him but couldn't provide a safe place. Turning to Leo, Clara placed a hand on his head, feeling the weight of the unspoken bond between them. She understood now that Leo had brought her here with a purpose, and that this was only the beginning of their search. She promised herself she would find the person connected to this makeshift home, someone who might reveal how the boy had come to be in such danger. In that moment, she knew her mission went beyond mere curiosity. It was a calling to piece together this fragile story, to bring justice and healing to those caught in the shadows. As Clara looked at the makeshift shelter in the alley, a pang of sorrow filled her. The small, tattered blankets and scattered toys spoke of a life filled with struggle and scarcity. Leo's nose lingered over the blankets, and Clara felt the tug of urgency to find out who had been here and why. She couldn't shake the feeling that this shelter held an important connection to the child now lying unconscious in the hospital. Clara gently stroked Leo's head, quietly promising to uncover the story that led him here. Just as Clara was about to leave, she heard a faint sound from further down the alley. She tensed, unsure of what to expect. Leo's ears perked up, and he turned, eyes fixed on the shadowed figure emerging slowly from behind a wall. A woman, thin and disheveled, with hollow eyes and worn clothes, stepped into the dim light. Her gaze fell on Leo first, then moved to Clara, who instantly recognized the mix of fear and exhaustion on the woman's face. There was a sadness in her eyes that went far beyond her appearance. It was a look Clara had seen too many times in people who had been through unimaginable hardship. Clara instinctively took a step forward, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Clara. I work at the hospital nearby." The woman looked wary, her eyes darting between Leo and Clara as if deciding whether to trust them. Is he all right?" the woman finally whispered, her voice strained and barely audible. Clara's heart tightened as she realized this must be the boy's mother. She nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Yes, he's safe now. He's in the hospital, getting the care he needs." The woman let out a shaky breath, visibly relieved but still tense. She introduced herself as Helena, her voice laden with guilt and fear. Helena explained that she had been unable to provide a safe place for her son, despite doing everything in her power to protect him. Tears filled her eyes as she described the last few weeks, how she had watched over him every night, hoping for a miracle, until desperation drove her to an impossible choice. She had sent him with Leo, hoping the dog would find help where she could not. Helena's voice broke as she recounted that moment, the last time she had seen her son. She described the helplessness that had overwhelmed her, the feeling of having no options left, and the heartbreaking decision to trust Leo, a dog she had found wandering the streets months ago. She had come to rely on Leo's loyalty, his quiet presence, and in a moment of complete despair, she had asked him to protect her son when she could no longer do so herself. Her words struck Clara deeply, leaving her speechless for a moment as she took in the enormity of Helena's decision. Clara placed a comforting hand on Helena's shoulder, struggling to find words that could soothe the pain she felt radiating from the woman. "You did what you thought was best," Clara murmured gently. "And because of Leo, your son is alive." Helena looked down at Leo, her expression a mix of gratitude and sadness. She knew Leo had saved her child, and that knowledge seemed to ease some of the guilt she carried. Yet there was still a profound sorrow in her eyes, the weight of years of hardship and sacrifice that couldn't be lifted so easily. They sat together in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the city distant, as if respecting the weight of Helena's story. Clara wanted to ask more, to understand how Helena had ended up here, but she sensed that Helena was already overwhelmed. Instead, she gently offered to bring Helena to the hospital, to let her see her son again. Helena hesitated, worry etched into her face, but finally nodded, taking a deep breath as though bracing herself for what lay ahead. With Leo by their side, they walked the few blocks back to the hospital. Helena's steps were slow, her shoulders hunched under the weight of years spent surviving on the streets. Clara felt an overwhelming sense of admiration for this woman who had sacrificed everything for her child, even if it meant entrusting him to a stray dog. Leo stayed close to Helena, his presence both comforting and steady, like a silent guardian who had always been there, watching over them both. As they reached the hospital, Clara felt a mix of relief and anticipation. She hoped that seeing her son safe and warm would help Helena heal, that it would offer her some semblance of peace after everything she had endured. They walked through the familiar hallways, the sterile lights casting an odd sense of calm over the scene. When they reached the boy's room, Helena hesitated at the door, her hand trembling as she prepared to see her child once more. Clara gave her a nod of encouragement, gently guiding her into the room, where she would be reunited with the son she had sacrificed so much to protect. Helena stood just inside the boy's hospital room, her eyes filling with tears as she took in the sight of her son, his small body resting peacefully under the warm blankets. Clara quietly stepped aside, allowing Helena and her son this moment. It was as if a lifetime's worth of worry and relief converged within Helena's heart, and she choked back a sob as she gently reached out, brushing her hand across her son's cheek. She whispered words of comfort, a prayer of gratitude that he was safe, a quiet promise to never let him go again. As Helena sat beside her son, Clara could see the woman's resilience shining through her weariness. The boy stirred slightly, his eyelids fluttering, but he didn't wake. Clara took the opportunity to sit with Helena, eager to learn more about how she and her son had come to this difficult point. Gradually, Helena began to talk, her voice soft but filled with pain and regret. She spoke of Raphael, the boy's father, whom she believed had abandoned them years ago, leaving her and her son to face the world alone. Helena explained that she had met Raphael when they were both young and hopeful, with dreams of a future together. But one day, shortly before the boy was born, Raphael left without a word, leaving her in a state of shock and despair. She had no choice but to survive on her own, doing what she could to care for her son. Over time, resentment had replaced her love for Raphael, and she hardened herself to the painful memories of his sudden departure. The city had become their prison, its streets and alleyways a harsh reminder of the life she had once dreamed of. Listening to Helena's story, Clara felt a deep sadness for the life Helena had endured. She wished there was something she could say to ease Helena's pain, to offer her a new perspective. It was then that Clara remembered something, a small box the police had handed over to her earlier in the day. It had been found in the makeshift shelter, hidden among the few belongings Helena had left behind. Clara had barely glanced at it, assuming it held little of importance. Now, she handed it to Helena, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside the box were letters, each one carefully addressed to Helena. Confusion crossed her face as she pulled out a stack of envelopes, some yellowed with age, all of them bearing Raphael's handwriting. Clara watched as Helena opened the first letter, her eyes widening as she read. Raphael had written to her, explaining that he had been diagnosed with a terminal illness just before their son's birth. Fearing that his illness would only burden Helena, he had made the heartbreaking choice to leave, believing it was an act of mercy. Tears streamed down Helena's face as she read the words Raphael had left for her. Every letter revealed a man who, despite his fear of death, had loved her deeply and had made an immense sacrifice to spare her pain. His letters held instructions for his brother, João, to ensure Helena and their son were supported after he was gone. He had left money and resources, trusting João to care for his family. But Raphael's final act of love had been hidden away, his letters and support kept secret by João's selfishness. Clara watched as Helena's expression turned from sorrow to shock, then to anger. The betrayal was sharp and overwhelming. João had not only robbed her of Raphael's memory, but had also condemned her and her son to a life of struggle. As the truth sank in, Helena's shoulders slumped, a mixture of grief and betrayal weighing down her spirit. Raphael had not abandoned her, he had sacrificed everything to protect her. Helena clutched the letters to her chest, closing her eyes as a flood of memories washed over her. Clara placed a comforting hand on Helena's shoulder, her own heart aching at the story that had unfolded. She could see that the discovery of Raphael's letters had changed something in Helena. In her eyes, the years of anger and resentment were giving way to something else, a bittersweet realization that Raphael had always loved her and their son, even as he faced his own death. Helena looked up at Clara, her voice trembling. "I thought he didn't care, but he never stopped loving us." Helena's hands shook as she held Raphael's letters, the weight of João's betrayal finally sinking in. She realized that her years of hardship, the life she and her son had endured on the streets, could have been different if João had honored Raphael's wishes. Clara felt her own anger bubbling up as she thought about João's selfish actions. His betrayal had deprived Helena and her son of the life Raphael had fought to secure for them. It was clear to both women that João needed to face the consequences of his actions. Clara suggested they take the letters to the authorities, to let the truth come to light. Helena nodded, still visibly shaken, but resolute. The letters in her hand felt like pieces of Raphael's love, a lifeline she could finally grasp after years of drowning in despair. As they prepared to leave, Leo padded over, pressing his head gently against Helena's leg, a comforting presence in the storm of emotions swirling around her. She reached down, her fingers curling in Leo's fur, grounding herself in the here and now. At the police station, Clara and Helena explained everything, recounting the events of the previous night and showing the letters to the officers. The weight of Raphael's words and the evidence of João's deception created an unbreakable case. The officers assured them that an investigation would be opened, and João would be held accountable. As they left the station, Clara felt a sense of justice beginning to take shape, a resolution that might finally bring peace to Raphael's memory and justice to Helena and her son. Helena's shoulders relaxed slightly as they walked back to the hospital. The tension that had once filled her steps was replaced by a quiet determination. She now carried Raphael's love with her, a hidden treasure that would give her the strength to rebuild her life. Clara stayed by her side, offering silent support as Helena processed the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken her. Leo walked close to them, his steady presence a reminder of the loyalty and love that had guided him to save her son. They arrived at the hospital, the sterile lights and clean halls welcoming them back. Helena visited her son, sitting by his side and holding his hand as he slept. She could feel Raphael's presence with her, a bittersweet comfort that soothed the ache of the years she had spent alone. Clara felt a profound sense of relief, knowing that Helena had found the truth she needed to heal, and that Raphael's sacrifice had not been in vain. Over the following days, Clara continued to visit Helena and her son in the hospital. Their bond grew stronger, shaped by the trials they had faced together and the shared hope that Raphael's legacy would endure. Leo, the quiet hero, stayed close to Helena and her son, a loyal guardian who had witnessed their darkest moments and now shared in their path toward healing. Each day brought a small measure of peace, a slow but steady journey toward a brighter future. As promised, the authorities investigated João's actions, and his betrayal was made public. Clara and Helena stood firm, determined to see justice served. João tried to deny everything, but the letters and Raphael's clear instructions spoke for themselves. João was held accountable, facing legal consequences for the hardship he had inflicted on Helena and her son. The court's verdict brought Helena a sense of closure, a symbolic resolution that allowed her to fully embrace Raphael's love without the shadow of deceit hanging over it. Clara, who had been with Helena through every step of the journey, felt a quiet pride in the outcome. She had not only helped a family reclaim their dignity, but had also witnessed a transformation within herself. Her work at the hospital had brought her closer to understanding the profound connections that can arise between people, even through hardship. Leo had been a silent hero in this story, an unlikely guide who had led her to a purpose she hadn't known she needed. With João's betrayal now exposed, Helena felt a weight lift from her heart. She no longer carried the anger and resentment that had once consumed her. Instead, She held on to the memory of Raphael's love, a love that had endured even in the face of death. She promised herself she would raise her son with the knowledge that he was cherished and that his father had sacrificed everything to ensure their safety. As Helena's son grew stronger, she began to regain her strength as well. Each day in the hospital brought small moments of joy, a soft smile from her son, a warm cup of tea shared with Clara, Leo's ever-present companionship. Helena had found a new sense of peace, an acceptance of her past, and a hopeful vision for the future. She knew that Raphael's sacrifice had given her a second chance, and she vowed to honor his memory by creating a life filled with love and resilience. Clara continued to visit, her own spirit lifted by Helena's journey. Together, they began to discuss plans for Helena's new beginning. Clara introduced her to community resources, housing programs, and educational opportunities, guiding her toward a future that felt within reach for the first time in years. Helena embraced these chances, grateful for Clara's friendship and support. Their bond had become a sisterhood forged in sorrow and healing. Leo stayed close, his loyalty unshaken. He was more than a stray dog, he was a symbol of Raphael's love and Helena's courage, a constant reminder of the miracle that had brought them together. Each time Helena looked into his eyes, she felt a surge of gratitude, as if Raphael himself had sent Leo to protect her and their son. Leo, in his silent, steadfast way, had become family. In the weeks that followed, Helena and her son left the hospital to begin their new life. With Clara's support, they moved into a small apartment nearby, a modest but safe place where they could finally build a future free from the shadows of their past. Leo, of course, stayed with them, his presence now a comforting constant in their lives. He had proven himself a hero, a guardian of a love that transcended even death. Clara watched from afar, grateful to have played a role in their story. She continued her work at the hospital, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The story of Helena, Raphael, and Leo had reminded her of the power of connection and the strength that can arise from the most unexpected places. Her days were no longer filled with numbness, but with quiet gratitude for the chance to help those in need, even in the darkest of circumstances. As the sun rose on a new day, Helena, her son, and Leo sat together by their window, watching the world come alive with the morning light. They had come through tragedy and loss, betrayal and sorrow, but together, they had found hope. And for Clara, knowing that she had been part of this transformation was a gift she would carry with her forever, a reminder that love, loyalty, and sacrifice could change lives, bringing even the most broken hearts back into the light. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.